Hey guys, TNC here, and I've got a video for y'all about my top 5 favorite lures to use for speckled trout and redfish. This hierarchy isn't really very clear to find, however I do have a couple of strong personal favorites that I do like to throw. And sometimes a lot of this does depend on the season and the time of year, which when I'm throwing these baits. Sometimes it's too cold and the water temperatures are below 40 degrees. Sometimes it's too warm and sometimes the water temperatures are 80 plus. Sometimes I'm fishing shallow water, sometimes I'm fishing deep water, sometimes I don't know what the heck I'm fishing. And so in this video, I'll try to narrow it down between where to throw some of these baits and why some of them are my favorite. So please like and subscribe and enjoy. Number 5. Standard curly-tail grub on a jig head. This is a bait that I like to throw when the bite is really tough. For example, usually in the summertime when it's really warm, or maybe sometimes even in the wintertime. But there's another bait that I typically like to throw in the wintertime, and we'll get to that here in a sec. And for this bait, this is more so the presentation, not necessarily the curly-tail grub itself. It's more so just the presentation of this bait, and that's kind of what more so gets the strikes. A good comparison for this bait for bass fishing would probably just be a finesse jig. This jig head weighs about maybe a quarter ounce. It's very light and it takes a little bit for it to get to the bottom, especially if you're fishing a lot of current. This could also be kind of compared to maybe even a Ned rig, something newer that's kind of taking the market for bass fishing by storm. Docks, jetties, creeks, marshes, you can work this bait anywhere and still get bites. Ways you can work this bait: cast it out there, let it hit the bottom, and just bounce it off the bottom. Or you can cast it out there and just let it swim right along the bottom. Number 4. Saltwater spinnerbait. This is more so a bait that's commonly used by a lot of the red fishermen that fish a lot of the redfish tournaments. And a lot of these other baits, they're also good for redfish too. I mean, wherever there's trout, there's going to be redfish. So just like in bass fishing, just cast this bait out there and cover water. That's the name of the game with this bait. Works really well with redfish and, like I said earlier, and speckled trout. And it's just as effective as a regular bass spinnerbait. Where I like to work this bait, I like to work it in marshes, creeks, and jetties. Those are the 3 probably most effective places that I've used it. You can probably use this bait just about anywhere, kind of like the jig head that I showed you earlier. Number 3. A popping cork and a plastic bait underneath. Kind of like with the jig head earlier, you can put just about any plastic bait under this and it will still work. It's more so the noise that is generated by the popping cork itself. This can potentially be some of the most easy and most fun fishing that you'll have if there's a really good bite for it. All you gotta do is cast it out there and wait for the bait to get underneath the cork, and the cork will be sitting on the surface, and all you gotta do is just pop it. Make that noise and draw some fish over to the bait underneath. Where this setup works. This setup is especially good in marshes and creeks. However, I've also managed to have some effectiveness around jetties and other places. You can really throw this bait just about anywhere. Basically all these baits that I have listed, you can throw these baits just about anywhere. But some of them definitely have their place, and this place just so happens to be around a marsh and a creek. Number 2. A topwater spook. On the topic of fun fishing, wait till you start throwing this bait. And if you want to catch some of the biggest trout you will ever see, start throwing this bait and the next bait. This bait can shine just about anywhere you want to throw it. However, you should also watch the water temperatures with this bait. If you're fishing this bait in the summertime, fish it early in the morning and later in the evening because it's a little cooler in the mornings and the evenings. I would also suggest to not fish this bait during the wintertime for the same reason, just because the water temperatures are going to be a little bit cooler and the fish won't be quite as active as they are in warmer times of the year. And this bait demands a very active fish for them to come to the surface and strike at baits that are working the surface. How do you work this bait? Cast it out there, let it hit the surface, and just start twitching it back and forth for it to walk across the surface. And you hear that rattle? Use that rattle and they'll be attracted to that rattle and they'll strike at the bait. A lot of people are very familiar with the name Mirror Lure. That's a very good name, and they make really good baits, and they're very easy to buy. Just go to your local tackle shop around the coast and they'll have several of them. I mean, you can even find some of them at Walmart too. But this bait in particular is a Bad Monkey Lures custom Walk the Dog. It's made out of resin, which is some of the best quality baits that you can find. This bait is one of the most best quality baits that I've ever used. They're just really good baits, and it's just one dude that works in a garage, makes these baits, and stuff like that is what I really support. For me personally, I am a guy that prefers a hard bait over a soft bait just because I personally think that you can get some bigger fish, but that's just my experiences. And also that I will leave a link in the description to all of these baits, including Bad Monkeys. I'll leave a link to the dude's Instagram down below. Number 1, sink and twitch baits. Back to the topic of hard baits, my number 1 favorite bait to use for speckled trout is a sink and twitch bait. The biggest trout I have ever caught have come off of these baits, and these again are not mirror lures, these are more Bad Monkeys. Again, link will be down in the description. This is a new pattern that he's produced. He's put glitter in these baits. Still made out of resin and still super good quality baits. How do you work this bait? Just cast it out there, let it sink for a couple feet depending on how deep you're fishing, and just start twitching it back and start working that rattle inside the bait, and hopefully you can attract some fish over to have them hopefully eat it. The key to this bait is to have long pauses after you've worked that rattle good enough. Usually those fish will come over and find the bait, and typically what I tell myself whenever I'm fishing this bait is to just pause longer. Say about 90%, maybe even 100% of your hits are going to come from when that bait is sitting there. You can fish this bait any time of the year. However, the most success that I have had is during the wintertime. Why? Well, the nature of this bait is to let it sit there, and that's kind of how other bait fish typically act around this time of the year. They're not very active, they're very lethargic due to it being colder. And that's typically why it's so successful in the wintertime. And since trout are also kind of known as a wintertime fish in North Carolina, well, it kind of makes sense that this would be a really good bait to throw in the wintertime. And there you have it. That was a review of the top 5 favorite baits I like to throw for speckled trout and occasionally some redfish. I may end up making a video on my top 5 favorite baits I like to use for redfish, but the list is pretty similar to what this is now, and there may be a couple of exceptions in that list, but we'll see. And again, this is all my personal preferences and my experiences. Your experiences may differ from mine, and that is perfectly okay. And that's going to do it for today. Please leave a like and subscribe, and leave a comment if there's anything you'd like to know about in the video, and I'll see you again next time.